Welcome to the theory notes for SITXFSA006 Use Safe Food Handling Practices. And I got a whole lot of interesting information. A lot of it is very dry and legislative and compliant based, but that's what the fundamentals of this unit and the previous one, FSA005, that's what they're all about, food safety and hygiene. That first one, FSA005, that was about personal hygiene and ourselves. And this one is more about interacting in the workplace and what we can do to maintain food safety and control hygiene principles. In Australia, we have the Food Act, which is the legislation, and we have the Australian New Zealand Food Standards Code. There's various chapters within the code. Chapter 3 talks about workers at an operational level, and it talks about these examples, this food handling controls in relation to food receipt, so that's receiving foods. Food handling controls in relation to food storage, so how and what we, where we store things and what we have to do while it's in storage. Controls in relation to food processing, so that's whether it's going to be cooking, whether it's going to be serving it, whether it's going to be slicing it, what sort of equipment we're going to use and what we need to, how we need to maintain our equipment. Controls in relation to food display. Okay, so that's when food is on display, temperature control, the hygiene of utensils, packaging, that's what that means. Controls in relation to food packaging, so this is all around the containers that we use or vessel that we use or cling wrap is what's going around in my mind, but it might be cardboard containers, it might be bamboo containers, there's a variety of packaging ingredients, and this is the controls around how we maintain that. Controls in relation to food transportation, how we're going to maintain hygiene around transporting food. Controls in relation to food disposal, how we dispose food, when we need to dispose food, why we dispose of food. That's what that point's about. Food recall. Okay, so whether that's not receiving food, whether it's sending it back, whether it's how we keep it and what we do with it if it's not good enough to serve. Health, hygiene and general requirements for food handlers. Our obligations in relation to cleaning, sanitizing and maintaining equipment and premises, and several different types of requirements there in terms of the use of temperature measuring devices, single-use items, and alternative methods of compliance to ensure the safety of food. Okay, so that's really what Chapter 3 of the Food Standards Code is about. Food safety programs. We'll talk a couple of times about food safety programs here, or in these slides at least, but a food safety program is something that every food business needs to have. Okay, it's a legal requirement. It helps maintain the safety of food for the public. It helps the business track, monitor and record its food safety practices. And it provides evidence of compliance with mandated obligations through the records which have to be maintained. Okay. Essentially, it's a document system. It's our policies and procedures as to how we are going to track, monitor and record our practices. So this would be documentation of food safety supervisors. it would be temperature log sheets, it would be waste practices, it would be pest control monitoring. So various different policies and procedures around how we maintain the food safety in our food business. Every food business needs to have it. Let's have a little look at a couple of other things. So some generic components for a food safety program. Business details, obviously, right? What is the business? Who is the PCBU? Who are the operators? Who's the food safety supervisor? Okay. Information on the food processed or served and the food business practices. So what are we doing? Are we a food truck? Are we a cafe? Are we a restaurant, a hotel? What's this food safety program for? Safe food practices in relation to purchasing and receiving of food. We saw this information just before. Food storage, thawing frozen food. Okay, how do we do that? Should be in the fridge. Food preparation. Okay, that's all around, gloves, single-use gloves, and, with a real focus on these are disposable items that are there to be used so that we're not cross-contaminating things. How we cook food, how we cool and freeze food, how we reheat prepared food, how we serve food and display food, the packaging and transportation that we use, maybe information about events and catering. What happens if someone wants some catering to be brought to their place? How are we going to transport that, and how are we going to maintain our food safe practice while we get that product to that customer? Information about food allergens, intolerances, and general information about customers. So what are we doing to ensure that we are meeting our legislative requirements around preparation for people with allergies? And several different other support programs there in terms of cleaning and sanitizing, supervising food handlers, temperature control equipment, pest control, food recall, waste disposal, time controls. Right, so how long are we keeping food for? Are we maintaining danger zone information, and are we monitoring how long we're holding food for, and I guess, at what point we need to consider selling food, discounting food, or indeed throwing food away. And then all our other food safety documentation, including records, logs, and registers that are appropriate for the type of business. EHO, I love talking about this one, the local government. In my time as a chef, I have operated businesses through 12 different local councils. The way things work is legislation is created by government, local governments. So they have to follow the legislation, but they can go above and beyond that. And then it's up to individual businesses to develop their policies and procedures in line with the legislation. Local government and indeed state government, the food authority, they have responsibilities for people, and what that's about is monitoring businesses, and fundamentally it's about ensuring that businesses are aware of their responsibilities. Okay. Local government are responsible for ensuring safety and quality of food offered for sale for public consumption. Okay. They are the ones that approve the food safety programs for the business. They work with businesses to advise, assist, and educate them about food safety. They enforce the Food Act, okay, which was that legislation that we talk about, and they investigate instances of food poisoning. So pretty serious stuff there, okay. There are consequences to not following food safety legislation, okay. There might be verbal warnings. There might be warning letters for remedy of deficiency. There might be penalty notices, and every time the EHO comes out to your business, you're going to have something to pay. They could come in and they could shut the business, and they could prosecute people and the business. Okay, so pretty serious stuff. There is a website called the Name and Shame List, where any food business that gets served notices from the Environmental Health Officer, that information goes onto the Food Authority's website so everyone can see what's going on. We talked earlier about the Food Standards Code. Okay, the Food Standards Code outlines information. We talked about Chapter 3 earlier. It does have a whole lot of definitions, but 3 we're going to talk about right now are contaminant. And a contaminant is any biological or chemical agent, foreign matter, which would be physical contaminant, or other substances that may compromise food safety or suitability. Contamination is the introduction or occurrence of a contaminant in food. All right, so that's quite important, those 2 definitions there. So what that's saying is, if a food has a biological or a chemical or a physical substance that may compromise food safety, then that food is contaminated. Okay. And then the last one there is potentially hazardous foods. Food that has to be kept at certain temperatures to minimize the growth of any pathogenic microorganisms that may be present in the food, or to prevent the formation of toxins in the food. Those 3 are pretty powerful definitions when or if at any time you need to speak to anyone about food safety. This is potentially hazardous food in the context of, this is potentially hazardous food, and that's now contaminated. All right. So issuing a warning to a staff member might be, you want to serve that food after I've just told you that that's potentially hazardous and it's contaminated. It's my legislative responsibility to report that you are doing that. HACCP. HACCP is a term that gets used quite frequently. It's quite a strict food safety program, essentially. Okay, and it's worldwide. It's known worldwide. Okay, it stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. Okay, so it's a system which clearly identifies hazards and establishes controls that will prevent, eliminate, or reduce hazards to an acceptable level. So it's going back to that information about the food safety program, and this is a step-by-step process around how we manage hazards and controls. 7 principles there, you can see, of how we set up our HACCP system. We would start with principle 1 being conducting a hazard analysis, right? So It's observing, doing a risk analysis and finding where hazards are or potential hazards are. We determine critical control points. Okay, principle 2. Critical control point sounds quite aggressive, but what that means is, and for example, I set up a HACCP program at a really big club, and we used to get deliveries into the loading dock, okay, and we had a cool room downstairs. So the cool room downstairs was a critical control point, okay. So that was the point in which delivery driver would drive up with their refrigerated van and they could unload our supplies into a cool room, okay. So we identified in our analysis that there is the potential there for food to be sitting in the danger zone, and I'll talk about the danger zone later, for a period of an unknown period of time, okay. Hence why we determined that this cool room is here, our food gets delivered into it, therefore it stays out of the danger zone, and we have controlled any issue, any hazard that may arise, or certainly the hazard around temperature control there. Okay. Principle 4 is about establishing monitoring systems. Most of the time this is in the form of checklists. Okay, so a monitoring system might be, for that fridge that I just spoke about, might be a temperature check sheet. Okay, and the temperature check sheet will be dependent on the hazard analysis, but it might be checking the temperature of that fridge twice a day, every day. Okay, that's paperwork that then needs to be kept and in a certain area. So if ever there is any instance of any hygiene issue, the EHO comes out and he says, righto, you've got your critical control points, so let's find out where this issue happened. Okay, and if he goes through all our critical control points and documentation and verification and corrective actions and monitoring systems and critical limits and hazard analysis, and he finds that there is, we checked the temperature of the fridges, there was no problem. We checked the temperature of the food when we cooked it, there was no problem. We checked the temperature of the food when we served it, there was no problem. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that there was any fault on us for this instance of food safety. That's how HACCP works. So there's a sequence, right, that goes in line with the principles, a sort of step-by-step process. Yeah. So it's a lot of, sounds like a committee, doesn't it? But anyway, assemble the HACCP team. It's like, HACCP team, assemble, Avengers. I want to have my own Marvel HACCP team. So you can see I've got 2 step 3s there, but that's a mistake. So step 2, describe the product. Step 3, identify the intended use. Flow charts, confirmation of flow charts, hazard analysis, there it is, determine the control points, establish the critical limits, establish monitoring systems, establish corrective actions, establish verification procedures, and establish documentation and record keeping. Now, corrective actions is always something that people ask about. A corrective action is basically, let's say we've got our critical control points, we go back to the fridge. Let's say I come down to the fridge at some point, and the fridge is running at 8 degrees, okay, which is not good because a fridge should be under 5 degrees. So what do we do about that? How are we going to correct that? Are we going to, is it just because the door's been open, it needs to be closed? The point here is that I need to make a record of that, and I need to identify what I'm going to do. So At 8 degrees, I'm going to monitor it for an hour, and then I'm going to make sure there's no food in there. I'm going to come back and check it in an hour. If it's at 8 degrees still or it's higher, I'm going to organise someone to come out and repair the fridge. So it's that then also becomes part of my documentation process, which is step 12. Critical control points I spoke about. They're the steps in the process where a control measure is applied and is necessary to prevent, eliminate, or reduce a food safety hazard to an acceptable level. Critical limits and critical control points. Once a business has identified its CCPs, critical control points, it must determine at what point the product may become unsafe at that particular step in the process. These are usually referred to as critical limits, and are normally a measure that separates acceptable product from unacceptable product. Numerical values must include units and maximum, minimum, or acceptable range of values. Critical limits usually refer to a parameter that can be checked while the step is occurring, for example, time, so that if the limit is exceeded, effective corrective action can be taken immediately to correct the process and to prevent unsafe product from reaching the customer. So that sort of talks about the information that I was talking about before about the fridge. A few monitoring procedures here, which sort of aligns with question 13. Okay, so you can see this is sort of a step-by-step or a little bit more detail around those stages of food handling. You can see here we've got receiving and storing, right, and then the monitoring procedure or control after that. So inspect the food delivery, conduct the temperature checks, confirm the use by and best before dates. Okay, that's receiving. Storing might be FIFO, right? First in, first out, stock rotation. Checking the dates, making sure that we're rotating, separating raw from cooked, ready to eat items. Checking temperatures of fridges or frozen storage or freezers. Couple more procedures or controls. We've got preparing of food, so training of food handlers, using separate utensils, raw and cooked, cleaning and sanitizing utensils and surfaces. Defrosting food, how do we do that? Is it under cold water? Is it in a microwave? If it's in a microwave, we need to use it straight away. The general best practice for defrosting food would be to leave it in the cool room overnight, or for however long it takes to defrost. That way we can ensure that food never enters the danger zone. Processing of food, we've got to make sure that we cook raw meats to the required temperature, and a lot of the required temperatures are based around the potential for various types of bacteria. We've got processing, right? So taking foods to the right temperature, to the right temperature for the required time. Cooling hot food using the 2-4 rule, protecting food from contamination, and excluding pests, right? So proper pest control. A couple more here. Displaying of food, right? Hot food needs to be kept hot, cold food needs to be kept cold. Avoiding mixing of batches, and applying proper time controls. Right? The TDZ there, it talks about temperature danger zone, okay? And I will talk about that later, but it's particularly about temperatures and times, okay? Serving of foods and monitoring around that, using separate utensils, ensuring utensils and serviceware is clean, not reusing single-use items, right? Like disposable food safety gloves. We don't do that. Ensuring that reheated food is heated to the required temperature. discarding food dropped on floor or otherwise contaminated, right? So getting rid of contaminated food, and supervising self-serve facilities. The last couple of ones here for monitoring, our packaging, checking that our packaging is suitable for what's being packaged, right? Are we going to wrap up liquids in cling wrap? Probably not. Checking food items is protected. Food item is protected from contamination by its packaging. Okay, protecting packaging materials from contamination, protecting food from contamination during the process, cleaning and sanitizing the packaging equipment. Packaging goes hand in hand with transporting, especially if we need to move food. Okay, it talks about several different things there. We never leave the food being transported unattended. We've got to service our transport vehicles regularly. Only use clean containers and vehicles. Okay, proper temperature control is what we're looking for here. And this last one here is about disposing of food. Okay, ensuring unsafe food is destroyed or used for other purposes than human consumption. Right, so what that point there means is, well, if we've got some food left over that is unsafe, maybe it goes off to compost. Okay, so destroyed sort of indicates it should go in the bin. Maybe it goes into compost, depending on what sort of business you're operating. Dispose of food served to a person, right? Which means that when people send their food back, it needs to go in the bin straight away, or it needs to be wrapped straight away if the customer wants to take that home. And then separate food for disposal from other foods, right? So that's saying that garbage should not be in the general vicinity of food being prepared. Certainly we've got bins, but our bins should not be where we are preparing and serving food. Okay. You should be able to complete the information now for knowledge test 1. Welcome back, and here we are talking about food safety hazards. I love talking about food safety. I've taught food safety for a long time, and I'm really focused on it when working with chefs, because I don't like getting sick, right? I don't think anyone does. A list here of the main types of food safety. Cross-contamination. Cross-contamination happens when maybe fish juice mixes with chicken juice, maybe cooked chicken juice mixes with raw chicken juice. It's that sort of point, which is cross-contamination. Okay, it's when food that shouldn't be mixes. We could be talking here about inadequate washing, cleaning and sanitizing of utensils, food equipment and food contact surfaces. Okay, you cannot clean and sanitize enough. Failure to protect food from physical and or chemical contamination. Growth of bacteria when food is stored or processed under incorrect conditions. Improper reheating of cooked, potentially hazardous food. There's that terminology again. Improper thawing of frozen, potentially hazardous food. And the worst one, and in my opinion, the one that makes people sick the most regular, is poor personal hygiene practices. Okay, especially poor hand washing and staff working when they're sick, right? The one that I see quite regularly is people wearing single-use gloves, and they're using it all day long, right? Or using it to do multiple tasks, whether that's shaking someone's hand, taking someone's food to the table, and then going back and preparing food. So there was because you're wearing gloves does not stop you from transferring bacteria or viruses. I'll give you an example. I worked at a place over the Christmas holidays, and one of the kitchen hands had been given a position in the kitchen. And at one particular time, I saw him put gloves on, and I thought, that's fantastic. That's great food hygiene. But then he started to prepare and peel. No, he wasn't peeling. What was he doing? He was making a Caesar salad. And so he took the egg and he took all the ingredients for the Caesar salad, and then he prepared the salad, okay, using his hands. He then wiped the hands on the tea towel that was behind his back. He then came back and he prepared a prawn sandwich, prawn roll, okay, had his fingers in some cooked prawns, and then wiped his hands on the tea towel, and then he came back and he did something with chicken. I can't remember what the chicken was for. It was a chicken sandwich or something. I think he chopped up some warm chicken schnitzel. Then he went and washed his gloves, and then wiped his hands on his tea towel. Just terrible. 3 meals. There's the potential for 3 people to get sick right there. So I talked about this just before. When we're talking about contamination, we classify these contamination into 3 areas. Physical contamination, being metal shards or staples. Hair is the worst one, or band-aids, paint, fabric, toothpicks. Chemical contamination. This might be from cleaning chemicals not being rinsed off equipment properly. It might be from hand washing chemicals. It might be from any number of chemicals. Okay, and then biological contamination, which could come from yeasts, molds, fungus, mycotoxins, alkaloids, bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Okay, biological contamination. Here we go, bacterial conditions. In general, we talk about these 5 environmental conditions being the ones that are necessary for the development of microbiological contamination. Or not all. Some bacteria and viruses don't need all of these to grow exponentially, right? But in general, warmth, right? So this is why we talk about keeping food in the fridge or in the freezer at under 5 degrees. Moisture, okay, so anything that's got moisture in it, high chance that it's going to be a bacterial breeding ground. Time, obviously, so the more time something is warm and moist and has the proper pH and enough oxygen, this bacteria is going to grow exponentially. And there's bacteria in everything, good bacteria and bad bacteria, but some of it's good, some of it's not great. I like this one, the temperature ranges, and it's quite specific, okay, especially for when we start talking about the danger zone, and that's coming up in a minute. But these are the temperature ranges that we talk about that are required environmental controls for various foods. So you can see dry goods there should be in a 10 to 20 degrees range. Frozen foods should be minus 18 to minus 20. Refrigerated foods should be below 5 degrees, and hot food should be held at 60 degrees or above. I'll talk about the 60 degrees or above in a minute. These environmental conditions are generic conditions that are required for the safe storage of food. We need the correct temperature, we need the correct humidity level, the correct ventilation, the correct stock rotation, and protected from all forms of contamination. Here we go, the danger zone. It's not just a Kenny Loggins song, okay? The danger zone, the temperature danger zone is this time and temperature chart that we talk about, okay? So the temperature range between 5 degrees and 60 degrees. Right, so remember we talked about the fridge needing to be under 5 and hot food needing to be over 60. This is why the danger zone is what we talk about. It's the temperature range in which food poisoning bacteria multiply most rapidly. Okay, that's the importance of it. The importance for food handlers is so that food handlers can take action to minimize the time potentially hazardous food spends in the temperature danger zone and discard any potentially hazardous food that has spent 4 hours or more in it. Okay, the benefit of this, of cooling food as rapidly as possible, is to quickly prevent the growth of bacteria. The point is for food to spend the least amount of time in the danger zone. Okay, so this is our legislative requirement under the Food Standards Code. Food Standards Code talks about all food handlers must do everything they can to minimize the risk of transference of bacteria. That's legislation. Okay, and as we learned earlier, businesses can get into a lot of trouble for not having a food safety program and not taking these actions seriously. Now, a rule around the danger zone is the 2-hour, 4-hour rule. Okay. And it revolves around, and you can see in those 4 points there, it revolves around 5 degrees and 60 degrees. And what it is that the food that's, it's okay to have food in the danger zone, right? In the time period between in the temperature range between 5 and 60 degrees for less than 2 hours. It can be used, sold, or put back in the fridge to use later. That's when it's been in that temperature danger zone for less than 2 hours. Okay. So if it's been in the temperature danger zone, which is 5 and 60, for between 2 and 4 hours, it can still be used or sold, but you can't put it back in the fridge. Okay. You can't store it for a later date. Okay, and then once food has been in the danger zone, that's 5 and 60 degrees, for 4 hours or more, it must be thrown away. Okay, so that's that 2-hour, 4-hour rule. That time period, the 2-hour, 4 hours, it's cumulative, right? So you can't have a product in the danger zone for an hour, put it back in the fridge, then another hour, put it back in the fridge, then another hour, put it back in the fridge, then another hour, put it back in the fridge. Because that's 4 hours. Okay, so that's what cumulative means. Going back to food safety program and monitoring documents in particular. Okay, so a business may be required to maintain the monitoring of certain things in the food safety program, right? That would be a register of suppliers or approved suppliers. Okay, it should be you should have a goods received checklist record. You should have temperature records for refrigeration units, freezers, hot and cold holding and display units, food transportation vehicles if you have them, food processing log, right? So that's how food gets processed. Processing means cooking, might mean serving, It's all of those particulars. Pest inspection and control records and corrective action records. I know for a fact that environmental health officers want to see this information. At a minimum, they want to see your temperature records, they want to see your food temperature logs, they want to see your pest control records. Okay? Pretty serious stuff. Let's talk about food safety monitoring techniques. Okay. Let's go back to that last slide. It talks about fundamentally temperature checks. If we're going to use a probe thermometer, we should be using bacterial swabs and counts is actually a monitoring process. So some businesses do this, especially within a HACCP environment. They will take a bacterial swab of food and they will send it off to be tested or keep them logged for certain days and time periods. Okay, checking and recording that food is stored in appropriate time frames, so that's time and temperature controls. Conducting chemical tests, maybe it's a pH test. Monitoring and recording food temperatures using a temperature measuring device. Monitoring and recording temperature of cold and hot storage equipment, and visually examining food for quality review. Okay. These are all examples of food safety monitoring techniques. Just a couple more of this slide and then we'll move on, but this one is about packaging control measures. How do we control instances of contamination when looking at our packaging? Okay, some basic ones there are monitoring the packaging to check for damage. Maybe it's verifying packaging equipment is clean and sanitized, right? So that could be just where is our packaging stored. Okay, verifying packaging materials are clean and free from contamination and pests. Ensuring staff apply correct personal hygiene practices, right? So that's, watching staff and what they are doing in their performance and their work daily. Are they following their requirements under the food safety program? Fundamentally, whoever the food safety supervisor is or the business operator, it's their responsibility to ensure that staff are trained and staff are following the proper hygiene practices. And you can only effectively do this with a good food safety program. Okay. We need to ensure that single-use items are being disposed of after being used once. And then we should have some sort of system of tracking date and time. Should be our temperature logs. Okay, so one more here about in general, how can we ensure the safety of food sold to customers is safe? We can use protective barriers to protect food. We can use proper required temperature controls. We can supervise food displays. We can monitor utensils and to avoid cross-contamination. We can provide separate serving utensils for each dish. And we can apply controls to food that is packaged for sale and takeaway. Okay, so that really is looking at, I guess if I was to think about cafes, cafes sort of go about preparing food for the day and they might wrap things up. And I'm thinking about banana bread, for example, wrap banana bread on, put a day dot on it, and that's got a date, which is a control around how we monitor our foods. Okay, so 3 actions that you could do to mitigate or prevent cross-contamination of food allergens. Washing hands regularly and effectively. It's one thing to wash hands. I see so many people, all they do is just run their hands under cold water. That's not washing hands properly. I see so many people using gloves and using them even though they've just scratched their bottom or touched their hair or collected cash from a customer or use a till that gets used by multiple people. Okay. Yeah, it's our responsibility, everyone's responsibility for food safety. And then clearly labeling ingredients, containers, and keeping them closed when being stored or not in use. Okay, one last one there that I just want to focus on is this point about what is the benefit of cooling the food as rapidly as possible. I talked about that back on the danger zone one, right? So this is a point about danger zone, question 13. So when storing food items that need to be refrigerated or frozen, what is the benefit of cooling the food as rapidly as possible? Well, the idea is that we are preventing the growth of bacteria as the food spends less time in the danger zone. You should now be able to complete Knowledge Quiz 2. Welcome back. Moving on to Knowledge Test 3. Got a range of products here that we're talking about, or groups of products. If we talk about dairy, there's a list there of specifics that we need to focus on when handling dairy. Pretty straightforward. Applying correct personal hygiene practices, ensuring it's under refrigeration, thinking about temperature danger zone, stock rotation around FIFO, first in, first out. Do not store on the ground. It should be obvious. Nothing gets stored on the ground. How do we focus on safe food handling around dried goods? Several points there. Very similar to the last one, do not store foods on the floor, inspect food for damage, FIFO, personal hygiene practices. That's a really good one to think about, that third point there. Okay, dry goods should be put into a new container if they're opened. Okay, some products, in fact, are shelf stable while they're in a sealed container, but once they're open, they need to be stored in the fridge. Eggs is a big one with the including raw egg foods, right? So the EHA comes down on fresh egg products all the time, okay, because there's been multiple instances of people dying from poor handling of raw egg products. FIFO, store them under refrigerated conditions, don't use ones that are dirty or cracked. Avoid recipes requiring the use of raw eggs, or you can use raw eggs, but they really should be cooked. Cook dishes containing eggs according to safe practice mandates. Avoid cross-contamination. Definitely don't serve raw egg dishes to vulnerable people, and you really should avoid separating eggs using the shell. Okay. Because they're not 100% clean. And if you know anything about chickens, the egg comes out of the same place as the bottom. Frozen foods. Yeah, we talked about temperature there, at or below minus 18 degrees. Okay. Monitor temperatures regularly. Thaw foods correctly, right? Not at room temperature, they should be in the fridge. Don't refreeze partially defrosted foods. And FIFO's there again, first in, first out. Food handling practices for safety with regards to fruits and vegetables. Everything that we receive, we should be checking, inspecting on delivery and rejecting anything that's unsuitable. Washing and sanitizing, FIFO, okay, storing them under appropriate conditions. This is all similar for meat, poultry and fish. Yeah, the proteins are going to be more potentially hazardous than dry goods or fruits and vegetables, but even still, you know, the focus should be the same for everything as to safe food handling. In the kitchens, we have separate color-coded chopping boards for all different products. That's a really good safe food handling technique. Applying personal hygiene practices, thawing, FIFO, storing under the proper conditions. And that third point there is really quite interesting about where different foods should be stored in the fridge. Okay, talk about raw foods being stored underneath ready-to-eat items. That way you don't get raw food juices dripping onto something that is not going to be cooked. Okay, safe food handling. A couple of points on thermometer calibration here. Okay, there's two types of tests that we can do to calibrate a thermometer. There's the cold calibration and the hot calibration. The cold calibration is where you create an ice bath, okay, using 50-50 cold water and ice, allow it to stand for about 5 minutes, and then get the probe into the slurry and let it sit there for a minute or two. The temperature gauge should get to 0 degrees. Okay. On the other scale from that, we have a hot calibration, and that's about checking the temperature of boiling water. Okay, so boiling water, when it is boiling, should reach 100 degrees. That's how we calibrate our temperatures, our thermometers. So if your thermometer reaches those points when you're testing it, then it's an effective read. What do we do when we want to use it in terms of focusing on food safety? Okay, it should be washed, hot water and detergent. It should be sanitized before and in between uses. We can rinse it in hot water. We should air dry it. Okay, that's cleaning it. Pretty similar stuff for when we're using it as well. Wipe it with sanitizer before use. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Calibrate every 6 months or as required by the food safety program. So that could be something that's in the food safety program. And allow readings to stabilize after inserting the probe into the food. How do we know if our probes are faulty? Right. Calibration test will tell us. It'll be different when the environmental health officer comes in, but we really don't want to wait until that happens. Okay. Maybe our thermometer is giving us a different readout to a different thermometer. So if our fridge says that it's 10 degrees, but our thermometer says it's 20 degrees, well, then we know there's a problem there somewhere. Okay, so we're moving on to cleaning and sanitizing. Okay, how do we decide on what we're going to use to clean and sanitize? It really is going to depend on the nature of the task, how bad it is, when it needs to be done, or what needs to be removed. Okay, So those green and gold scourers are generally what gets used for general or purpose cleaning. Sometimes we're probably going to need stainless steel wool. Sometimes we're going to need scrapers. So yeah, and you know, that can also determine what chemical we're going to use as well. Okay, so cleaning support program should be like a cleaning checklist of what's going to get cleaned, how it's going to get cleaned, and how often it's going to get cleaned. Okay, maybe a piece of equipment needs to be cleaned in a certain way as per the manufacturer's advice. Okay, so you get some equipment that says, for example, I'm thinking about a combi oven, a combination steam roast oven. They say steel wool should not be used to clean this product, and you should only use the cleaning tablets that they provide. Okay, and then there's the workplace policies and procedures might determine what we're going to use. How do we determine pest control equipment? A lot of it comes down to the pest management service. Okay, they'll be as part of your food safety program, you should have a pest control, pest management service that comes in and they manage everything. The EHO or environmental health officer, they want to see that you're getting this done every 6 months or even more if it's needed. Last couple of points here now. We're talking about generic requirements that apply to maintenance of food utensils. You can see there FSP, that's talking about the food safety program. Essentially it's follow the food safety program for frequency, person responsible, what we're going to use, right? The method, the chemicals, and how often, yeah, and in what order, right? So cleaning and afterwards is sanitizing. Similarly with food utensils, the food safety program should outline how things are getting cleaned, and then indeed how things are being maintained, how's equipment being maintained. Okay, it should outline the necessary documentation to identify issues as well. That goes back to our corrective action forms. This picture's a good one. I wonder if that guy's standing on a milk crate because he's quite close to the extraction pan. So generic categories of cleaning that happen in a kitchen, right? So general dirt and debris, right? That's working dirt. Food waste, grease and oil, that's the worst one. That's what he's doing. He's cleaning the grease and oil from the machines. Yeah, and the last little point there is about pest waste and contaminated foods. How do we remove and get rid of that? Because it should be done by a specific pest waste management company. Okay. How do we determine exactly what is going to be cleaned, right? Because not everything can be sanitized, but everything should be cleaned. Not everything can be sanitized. Okay. So cutlery, preparation service, food production equipment, eating utensils and serviceware, food display equipment, drinking utensils. All these things need to be, or at least those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points need to be sanitized. You can't sanitize the floor. There's 3 generic examples of maintenance that need to be addressed in a commercial kitchen. Right? Maintenance means maintaining, which means doing it all the time. right? Recalibration of measurement and temperature control devices is important. Regular inspections, checks, and provisions of required maintenance regarding the construction elements of the kitchen. Okay, lighting, ventilation, etc. Certainly the fixed points as well, like floors, walls, and ceilings, they should be monitored regularly. One thing that the EHO will pick up on is chips and cracks in the tiles. Okay, and essentially that's arising as a result of day-to-day operations. And that's what the EHO is going to look for in your regular maintenance checks or focus on the kitchen and the hand washing facilities.